That means you can go.
Sorry, it wasn't displaying your image. Okay. Hello, everyone, and welcome to the May 24th Kubernetes community meeting.
Yeah, I'm just muting it now.
Okay. George, can you silence that person who's unmuted? Thank you for the May 24th Kubernetes community meeting. As a reminder, if you are not the current speaker, please make sure that you are muted. This meeting, like all community meetings, is recorded. But in addition to the recording, it's very important for us to have good notes for people who don't want to watch the whole video and need to find out what happened. So currently we don't have anybody volunteering to be a note taker. If someone can jump in and start taking notes on the meeting, that would be awesome. If so, please put your name right there under note taker in the document. Awesome. So, as always, we are going to start out with a demo. This demo is going to be on workflows as CRD from Jesse Suen or Suen.
Yeah, Suen.
Okay, Suen. Sorry, Jesse Suen of Intuit, who has a presentation for us. So, want to go ahead, Jesse?
Yeah, okay. Let me start sharing. Okay. All right, so I'll be talking today about Argo, which is Argo is a general purpose container-based workflow engine, specifically for Kubernetes. So I like to think of Argo as basically a fancy job controller. It's implemented as a Kubernetes controller in a workflow CRD, where every workflow step is a pod. It has a DAG-based DSL as well as a step-based DSL. So I think of it as kind of like either a bottoms-up approach of defining your workflow through DAGs, or a top-down approach defining it through sequential steps. Argo can be used, it was implemented with the CI/CD use case in mind, but it's been actually proven to be more flexible for things like data processing and ML pipeline training workflows. It's one of several projects that we have under the Argo Proj umbrella. So today we'll just be talking about the workflow, but Argo Workflow is kind of like a building block to other higher level applications like Argo CI, Argo CD, and eventing. Some of our users and contributors are in kind of the data processing space. We have Core Filing, Cyrus Biotechnology, Gladly, Google, specifically the Google Kubeflow team, here at Intuit, and NVIDIA. So this is just kind of a list of features that Argo supports. I won't go through everything, but just highlight a few. So we have built-in support for artifact management. So you can actually load and save artifacts out of a user's container without actually touching, like, their entry point or anything. We have parameterizations of workflows. You can loop and have conditionals inside your workflow. You can retry at the steps level or at the workflow level. And because we are container-based, we can leverage everything that the Kubernetes has with respect to pods. So things like volumes, scheduling, like pod affinity, toleration, node selectors, timeouts through active deadline seconds. We get all of those kind of features basically for free. So that's one of the reasons, like the things you kind of get with a Kubernetes-based workflow engine. Other things like auto scaling of your cluster depending on load. So I'll talk a little bit about a high-level architecture, how it's implemented. So design is fairly simple. You have a workflow controller that's running as a deployment. You have a UI, which is optional, and a CLI. And all of these services are interacting basically with the Kubernetes API server. No one's really listening on any ports aside from Argo UI. They're all just interfacing with the Kubernetes API server. When the workflow controller schedules pods, it will inject a init container and a sidecar wait container next to the user's main container. And the purpose for these two containers is basically for loading of artifacts and saving of artifact outputs. Okay, so I'll go ahead and start with the demo. This is the hello world of Argo. Basically, you have an entry point, which is a list of templates and an entry point, and the entry point is basically saying start here. And this template is doing nothing but executing a Docker whale-say container with the cal-say hello world. So I have a cluster that's already installed with Argo. And our CLI is basically, you can think of it as convenience around kubectl, because all of the workflows can be submitted using kubectl since they are custom resources. But with the Argo CLI, you get things like validation and some of the other features like resubmitting, retrying workflows, sending the parameters to the workflow. So we'll just submit the hello world. And then we'll go to the UI. And basically, that's it. So you have a single container workflow, and from here you can look at the logs. And this one has no artifacts, but if it had artifacts, you would be able to download them from the UI. And this is just kind of going over the YAML definition. So as I mentioned, there's two ways to define workflows. You kind of have a top-down, like iterative approach, or you can define it as a DAG with dependencies. So I'll submit both of these. And oops. So the DAG workflow that I just submitted is a classic just kind of diamond pattern where you have B and C are dependent on A, D is dependent on B and C. And the workflow controller will kind of will execute it in the dependence order to get to the final result. With the steps-based one, oops, shoot. Okay, with the steps-based one, can you guys see my screen? I accidentally clicked on stop video. Okay. All right. Steps-based one, you have top down. Like you can, each double dash indicates a sequence of parallel steps. So here we have a first step with executing a container, and then the second step group is executing two containers in parallel. And that looks like this. Okay, so these are the simple examples. You can actually execute templates from within templates. So so in this example, I have that same diamond template, but each step in that diamond template is actually invoking another template called coin flip. coin flip is a template which basically flips a coin and has a zero or heads or tail value, and this, depending on the value of that result, it will execute. It will branch between two different steps of that workflow. So. So here you can watch the workflow as it's happening. So it's basically, this is kind of illustrating the kind of dynamism of the workflow engine, and kind of illustrating like how you can nest your workflows into kind of modular components. Okay. So we also support things like loops and retries. So loops, this is an example where you can iterate a list of items. And in this case, we're basically iterating a bunch of Docker images, and then I'm just catting the OS release of the images. But this allows you to kind of have a kind of a concise definition of what you want to do to iterate on inside your workflow. You can also parameterize this, so this could actually be sent in as a JSON list. And when you submit this, it'll expand this step into, in this case, 4 parallel workflow steps. Another feature is the resubmit and retry of workflows. So this is an example of a workflow where it will actually fail. So I have a step which will fail with a 33% probability. So let's see what happens when I submit this workflow.
If you can wind up the demo in the next minute.
Okay. So here we already saw that it failed. If I retry this, I can say Argo. It basically will erase all history that of the steps that it failed and kind of continue where it left off. So when we get this workflow again, you'll see that these two failed. So let's retry this one more time. So it retried those same 2 containers. This time one more failed, and so you can kind of this is illustrating the fact that you can actually retry where the workflow left off and just erase all history of the fact that it failed. So you can only get that last retry that last failing piece.
And there are some questions.
Okay, and I can take some questions at this point.
Yeah, we only have about 60 seconds for questions.
Oh, okay.
Can this be run by triggers?
Okay, so one question is, can this be run by triggers? The workflow engine itself doesn't have any kind of eventing thing, so this is why we launched a separate project to handle events, like mapping like GitHub events to workflows. But the controller itself is just handling the execution. And the second question, do you have plans to hook into DSL with traditional scientific DAG editors? We don't have plans for editing, like a UI for editing workflows. Right now, it's all the Kubernetes-based declaration of workflows. Yeah. Okay. So I think that kind of wraps up the presentation. Oh yeah, so the project website is at github.argoproj.com, which I'll link right now. Oh, thank you.
Well, thank you very much for the demo.
Thank you.
And if you have more questions for them, then just ask them on chat.
Okay.
Or on their project. Okay, so next up, we have release updates, which in fact means, to start out, me. So next deadline on the release, we are in week 7 or week 8 of the release. 7, I think. Anyway, our next deadline is tomorrow, Friday. In addition to all of the GDPR-based website updates and privacy policies being due, which is not your responsibility, we have a doc at least having a placeholder PR for any docs for new features is due. So if you are working on a feature which is targeted at 111 that is on that feature tracking spreadsheet or otherwise, you need to open a placeholder PR against docs, which is where your eventual completed documentation will go. If you don't, then the docs team will come after you and pester you. So please go ahead and do that. And then coming after that, next Tuesday is the beginning of Code Slush, which means that at that point, we will be asking people to focus on getting everything cleaned up, ready for feature integration for 111. That is the beginning of the period where for 3 weeks, we kind of ask people to try to focus on getting the current release out, and maybe not working on stuff for future releases for a brief period. So for Code Slush, at that time, one of the things that's going to need to happen between Code Slush and Code Freeze, all of your issues and PRs are going to need to have complete labeling. Again, the team and or the bots will pester you about that. We need to see some progress on any feature work ongoing for PRs that are not yet merged. And all of that is in preparation for the beginning of Code Freeze, because at the beginning of Code Freeze, things that are not in progress and that are not correctly set up for merge into 111 are going to get punted to the next release. And Code Freeze starts on June 5th. One of the other sort of minor things is that one of the other things that we begin with Code Slush and Code Freeze are what are called burn down meetings. The idea of burn down meetings is for the release team and the release leads of any SIGs or authors of any features to meet up on a first 3 times a week and then in the last week on a daily basis to make sure that everything is being merged in and everything is working correctly. In the past, those have been held at 10 a.m. Pacific time. That time slot is problematic for a number of reasons. I've linked in the notes an issue discussing changing the timing, both to avoid conflicts with this meeting and to be friendlier to people in non-US time zones. So if you are a feature author for this release or a SIG lead, please do take a look at the proposed schedule for that and comment if that schedule will work better for you than previous burndown schedules have. The good news is CI signal is currently relatively clear. We have currently only 3 open issues that we're tracking in terms of blocking test failures, which is awesome at this point, given that we're not even in Code Slush yet. So again, I want to thank all of the many people, both from testing and from all of the various SIGs, in rapidly resolving test failures when they happen. And you're doing a lot to make this release process a lot smoother for everyone. So thank you very much. And the one other thing, I don't think Maciek is actually here, so I'll just mention that 1.10.3 was released Monday, I believe. And there isn't a scheduled date for the next 1.10 update, as far as I know. And those are your release updates. So unless we have any questions, next up is SIG updates, which will start with Doug Davis and SIG Service Catalog.
Yep. Can you hear me okay?
Yes.
Excellent, cool. So for those of you who are at KubeCon, this will basically just be a repeat of what I set up there, so very quick. In SIG Service Catalog, as of October 2017, we've been in beta, trying to move as closely or quickly as we can towards 1.0. To that end, we are trying to finalize our list of version 1.0 work items. You can see the list there: namespace brokers, asynchronous bindings. We are looking at using CRDs instead of our own standalone API server, and not using API aggregation at that point. We are looking at supporting generic actions on brokers as well as generic actions on instances. For those of you who don't know, that's basically allowing brokers to extend the open source broker API specification with additional operations. And right now we expose UUIDs or GUIDs as the Kubernetes name on resources. And that's not obviously necessarily ideal from a usability perspective. So those are some of the things we're trying to fix or at least address before we go to 1.0. In terms of newer developments though, we do have a svcat command line tool, which is simply a nicer user interaction model for people. It's actually very Cloud Foundry looking, if you're familiar with Cloud Foundry, with how they deal with services and bindings and hooking up your apps to services. So that may look very similar to you guys if you're familiar with Cloud Foundry. As I mentioned, we're looking at namespace brokers. They are in there, or inside the PRs there, but it's not necessarily merged yet. And as I said, we're looking at whether we can use CRDs instead of our own API server. So those are that's the work that's underway in new key developments. Not a whole lot to mention there, but other than we are moving closer and closer towards 1.0. Any questions?
Based on the shout-outs, apparently you had some active new contributor mentoring stuff going on?
Yeah, in fact, I think based on the shout-outs, big kudos to Carolyn, as well as to some of the other people I think that I mentioned the shout-outs. Yeah, we got a lot of people joining the group, and it's great to hear people thanking all the people there who helped bring them on board and educate them and show the patience, because sometimes newcomers don't feel as welcome as they should be, and luckily they're getting lots of help from people within the group. So yeah, lots of shout-outs to people like Carolyn and the other service catalog team. All right, there you go.
Okay. Well, thank you.
Yep.
Make sure there's no questions in chat. And doesn't look like it. Okay. Okay, next up is SIG Auth with Tim Allclair. Tim, you there? Tim, are you there? If you're there, you're muted. Okay. Not sure what's going on with that. In the meantime, we will move on to Brad Childs and SIG Storage. And if Tim logs back in, we'll get SIG Auth afterwards.
Okay, can you guys hear me?
Yes, we can.
Yep, you're fine.
All right, you guys see this okay?
Yep, we see it.
All right, so my name is Brad Childs. I am the co-chair of SIG Storage, and we had a face-to-face last week, and I was going to give the community an update on it. So we had over 40 people in attendance. It's a pretty big SIG, and we usually have between 40 and 50 people. It's representing about 19 plus companies. VMware provided the facilities for us and lunch, and Google provided dinner. So I want to give a shout out to those two companies. Our agenda was primarily technical. We started out with CSI, which is a big driver in the storage SIG. We're trying to get most of our function that's in tree out of tree, and CSI is the mechanism for us to do that. Okay, so the CSI discussion, we didn't go through too much new stuff. It was mostly current state of the art and what our plans were for 1.11. We have block storage. We have a driver register that we're trying to merge. We're trying to stabilize some of the cube CSI shim layers. And then there's a couple other features. But CSI is the underlying theme of probably the rest of these discussions, and that we're trying to achieve feature parity out of stream with our upstream stuff. I'm sorry, let me close this one window that keeps flashing. Okay, so snapshots, this is our other, this is another thing that we've had in tree for some time. And we're moving this out of tree, and we've decided to quit adding features to the in-tree function and instead just have it, just add new stuff to CSI and, you know, achieve the same feature parity that we have in tree. So there's two new methods for CSI. We have a create snapshot call and a create volume from snapshot call. And this is work that's in progress and should be landing as part of 111. We had a discussion on topology and local PV. This is scheduling storage on different zones, different racks, making sure the storage lands where the compute happens, or at least close proximity to it. This is another design presentation, and it's something that we're working on for 111 as well. And there's some CSI touch points that are still in progress. Next topic was local storage. This one we've been adding to over the last 2 or 3 releases, and we've the design's pretty stable. I think the big piece that we are working on right now is how we report from a node the capacity of local storage that can be provisioned there. And so the local storage is different in that it breaks our current PV-PVC binding controller, and it requires binding done close to the scheduler time. So if you're scheduling memory, CPU, now we also have to have a schedule predicate on disk space. We have to locate nodes that can actually handle those 3 things, and then schedule a pod there and bind the PV-PVC at the same time. So this is work in progress, and we're still making pretty good headway on it. Next feature that we've talked about is volume expansion, or this is resize without the shrink. We have an offline resize that we've made available in 110, and then we're working on online resize for 111. There's a couple technical details on the screen, but the majority of work in 111 is reaching feature parity in CSI, and that involves adding a controller expand volumes and a node expand volumes to the CSI spec. Our next topic was around testing and test coverage. We've done a pretty large inventory of our tests as part of the SIG, and also what we're missing, and adding new tests as part, well, as phase 0. Then as phase 1, we want to make sure that these tests are automated and run in a CI loop. And we've had quite a few technical obstacles around this, primarily in mount namespace propagation and different host drivers required to actually run these tests in all the different environments. We have tests running in Google Cloud. Our hope is to someday have all these tests running in the other cloud providers. And our current plan to execute on this is to start with VMware, since VMware is very well represented in SIG storage. And they've offered resources for us to run these tests. And then once we get everything running on the VMware cloud, we will use that as kind of a blueprint to ask the other cloud providers to run and execute the same tests regularly. We are asking for a 6-month commitment from vendors who want to be part of the automated CI testing. Next, we discuss operators. This is becoming a pretty big topic in SIG storage. We have a lot of systems that contain data that's either copied or extrapolated from other systems, and we want to keep the 2 in sync. And this operator pattern has emerged as a very popular and easy way to do this. We have a couple operator patterns existing already in our external storage provisioners, and then some of the snapshots work. There's some snapshot controllers that use the same library, but come to find out there's quite a lot of potential operator frameworks that we can use. And so we had some reviews and some demos of what other people are using for operators. On those lines, we've talked about breaking up the external storage repo, which uses one common library, and we'd explore the idea of using the shared library going forward, but we've determined that that's untenable, and that each project coming out of SIG storage would probably use its own operator library. Next topic was metrics, and this was more just a state of the world. Here's where we are with storage metrics. We have quite a few metrics to assist our SREs in taking corrective action. And we're also looking at ways to add metrics specifically from the cloud providers. So things like number of volumes attached to a disk. We'd like the cloud provider to add that information so that we can look at what Kubernetes thinks is attached to a node, and then take some corrective action if needed. And so there was a discussion on what new metrics we should add to facilitate this and how we could do it. And then some planning on doing this in the next couple of releases. There was a topic around API throttling, and that frequently the storage subsystem fails if API quota is exhausted, either at the API server, or at the cloud level. And we've did some brainstorming if we could parallelize, or if we could take the API calls and make it a serial thing that we either cached or did some rate limiting behind, but came out that that was a little bit too complicated, and we'd probably be just better off bubbling the errors up to the user and doing some information retry logic, as opposed to trying to corral all the API calls into one call. And then finally, our big topic was breaking up our giant external storage repository into separate repos. And for those of you that don't know, we probably have about 20 SIG storage projects that are incubating in an external storage repository. These are things like Ceph provisioners, snapshot providers, local storage provisioners. It's all out of tree work that's been done by the community, and some of it's in various states of maintenance. I'd say probably about half the repository is fairly active, and the other half has fallen out of use. So we've been working to identify project owners for each project and move the projects to someplace else and in their own repository. So we went through, I would say we have probably about 3/4 of our projects don't have an identified owner, and it's about the same 5 people that are owning the majority of the other projects. So if people from the community are interested or have storage projects in that external storage repo that haven't been present on the SIG storage calls, please contact me and let me know what projects you're working on or what projects you planning to take ownership of. And then as a second part of this, we talked about the in-tree volume drivers and how we would move them out of tree. I don't know, there's 15 or so in-tree volume drivers, and we want to make them CSI plugins at some point. The CSI plugins would be container orchestrator agnostic, so it's not a clear fit into the Kubernetes sphere of influence, but since most of these drivers would be probably authored and maintained by Kubernetes contributors, we're looking at the proper place to home these. And finally, if you want to see the notes or the recordings of the face-to-face, you can do it on YouTube or from this link, or a link from the storage SIG or meeting agenda. So I had, if there's any questions. Cool, thanks.
Thank you very much for delivering that update. Really interested to see how you get with the adding tests on other platforms, because it's something we've really needed across Kubernetes, is having some non-GCP automated testing. Are there any other questions? Oh, can you please add a link to your slides in the notes?
Yes, I will.
Okay, a lot of fairly exciting stuff from SIG Storage. I'm going to make another call for Tim Sinclair.
Yeah, sorry I'm late.
Ah, terrific. I'm glad you made it. Okay.
Come here is my computer.
unless you want to join your.
No, give me 1 second to pull up my notes here. Actually, maybe I'll join on mine. So
Yeah,
I
think
present.
Okay. The Zoom is in the invite.
What?
The Zoom link is in the invite.
Okay. Is there another topic we can go to now while I set up?
Let me see from announcements. Yeah, there's actually a couple of things. So I'll go through the announcements and then let me know when you're ready. So first, let's do shout-outs. As previously mentioned, shout-outs to a lot of the SVCat team for bringing on and mentoring some new contributors to that project and helping them a lot. Shout-out to Mike Splain for running the Boston Kubernetes meetup. Also to Paris for helping with mentoring. We have some help wanteds in here. Another call from SigUI who is looking for help. Is anybody from SigUI actually on the call?
No, but I was just in their meeting.
Okay.
Yes, if anybody on the line is a front-end developer that would like to help out with the dashboard, they actually said that they could use some back-end developers too. They're going through an Angular transition, and they will do one-on-one mentoring. Today they had an update call, and it will be posted later, so I'll post the link in the agenda, but also join their SigUI Slack channel for more info.
Okay, for that matter, you want to put out your mentoring call?
Yep. We are currently doing a drive for contributor mentors. So if you're interested, and yes, you can, you don't need to be a maintainer. You can be just a member of the organization. That is completely fine. We have 7 programs right now that half of them are testing. The other half are launched. One of them that's launched is Meet Our Contributors. That is a once-a-month YouTube series for folks to ask mentor-like questions to other contributors. It's very fun, and we have 2 times, and that's the next one is actually June 6th, I believe. So if you're interested, please feel free to fill out that form. That form is actually good for all mentors and mentees. It's a one-stop shop form. But would love to have anyone that is interested in getting more contributors into Kubernetes in any parts of the project.
Great, thank you. So Tim, are you ready?
Yeah, sorry. Go ahead and present here. All right, so just a few updates on what we're working on in SigAuth right now. On pod identity, we're moving forward with the service account token projection volume. So this is a way of automatically mounting tokens from the token request API into pods. The token request API, I believe, went to alpha in 1.10. And then the service count token projection volumes will be an easy way of getting access to those tokens in 1.11. We're also working on some improvements to the client Go credential providers for adding support for X509 credentials in there, and also externalizing some of the authentication providers that are currently in there to make the project more maintainable. On policy, not much has updated since the last SigAuth update. We're still working through the scheduling policy proposal. and kind of thinking about the sort of the long-term, the broader policy strategy in Kubernetes in terms of what things we want to have domain-specific built-in policies for, and what things we want to defer to third-party projects and plugins, or more sort of generic policy languages like the Open Policy Agent, for instance. Audit logging, we're still reviewing a few PRs to get some improved annotations into the audit logs for 111. So this will be a way of telling, adding some metadata about different authentication, authorization, and admission plugins that were that processed the request, and adding that information into the audit logs. Right now we're focusing on RBAC and pod security policy. On node isolation, there is a change that went in to restrict nodes from updating taints on themselves. This is to make it so that you can use taints to essentially quarantine a node, or say, you know, don't run a sensitive workload on this node. But if that node is compromised, then we don't want that node to be able to just remove the taint, sort of attract the sensitive workloads to that node to get access to the data, and then escalate from there. And so there have been a few issues since this is kind of a new change. There were cases where the node was adding taints to itself. And so we're still working through some of the details of how to kind of continue to support those use cases without allowing nodes to remove taints and attract those sensitive workloads. On security conformance, there's a CAP open right now around the security profiles. This is by Yisui, or Easeway is his GitHub handle. This is looking at how we might do a better job of testing security properties of a cluster. And then also tying it to the security profiles idea, which is a way of kind of grouping different configurations together to say, you know, these are the best practices that you should always use. These are the sort of more restrictive settings that you might use if you need a hardened cluster, for instance, and then associating different conformance tests with those different profiles. So this is very much a work in progress, probably won't land for 111, maybe 112. And there hasn't been any progress on the bug bounty program. We're still working on improving our security release infrastructure before we move forward with that. I think those are all the updates I have. Are there any questions about that? All right. Thanks all.
Okay, thank you very much for making the meeting. And that is all we have for this week, unless something came up that urgently needs to be shared. I want to thank our note takers, Tim Pepper, also Mukulika, if I'm pronouncing your name correctly. Sorry, we've never met, if I'm mangling that, who also helped out with the notes. So thank you very much for taking notes for everyone. And I will see you all next week and online.
Bye.